Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, sister. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, very good, thank you. Jazakallah khair for joining us today on the Niqabi Diaries. Sister, could you please introduce yourself for us and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure thing. So my name is Tuscany Bernier. I currently live in Indiana. I'm mainly a writer. But I feel like I do a lot of different creative things. So maybe it's more appropriate I just call myself a creative. But yeah, so I actually converted back in 2012, and I've been Muslim for a few years now. So alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So could you share with us a little bit about your your journey to Islam and how you came to accept Islam?
Sure, absolutely. So I actually grew up in a really small town. I like to describe it as a town that didn't even have like a stoplight.
Wow.
Yeah, very small. My family actually grew hay for other people's cows, and it was just very rural. And honestly, there was absolutely no diversity. So I happened to get Twitter, which was amazing because we didn't have high-speed internet for most of my teenage years. And I'm not that old, it's just, it was really far out there. And yeah, so there was a girl who kind of briefly mentioned that she was Muslim, and I realized I didn't know much about Islam. So
on Twitter, yeah?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And I think she was like literally like, it was a picture of her next to the Kaaba, and I realized like, oh, this is like very new and different. I don't know. So I Googled like, what do Muslims believe? And it came up with the Quran. And so I Googled like, where do I get one of those? And yeah, so went to a bookstore, got a Quran, and I started reading Surah An-Nisa. Because I kind of came from a very ignorant background, I think I presumed that the chapter called The Women would probably show why God hated women or something. I had an idea about Islam. And then, of course, I'm reading it, and Surah An-Nisa is nothing like that. It's, a lot of rules, but the rules about the edges of society. And as I was reading it, I felt like, okay, if God is real, then it would make sense that he would make these rules for all people everywhere, right? It proved to me that God was real, I guess. And so it really didn't take much longer after that. I think maybe I started reading from the beginning, from like Surah Fatiha and then Surah Al-Baqarah. And I realized, like, when they talk about they, meaning, I guess, like, the Qur'ans of the world, meaning Allah, it would mean me. I'm a believer. Like, it was not a very deep story, I suppose, as far as, like, my understanding at that point, but I just felt like whoever created this Quran, like, whoever wrote it, it had to be about me. And of course, like, now I have a deeper understanding of like the Quran and Islam, and it's been a wonderful journey, really.
Alhamdulillah, mashallah. So you kind of pretty much came to Islam by yourself?
Yeah, basically.
Just out of pure curiosity, subhanallah.
Alhamdulillah.
Wow, that's amazing. So how did you come to take the Shahada then? How did that work?
Well, I consulted with Professor Google. No, I did ask Google, like, so how do people become Muslim, and it was saying, you can do it at home. But I think from growing up Christian, I had this very institutionalized idea about coming to a new religion. So I Googled where the nearest mosque was, and I actually came to the town where I'm living now. And I showed up and I said, hey, I want to become Muslim.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. And what was the kind of response? Because that must have been a surprise.
You know, like for my family or for the local mosque?
Well, both.
So I laugh because I still find this so embarrassing so many years later. Every time I see this uncle, I think about this story and I just hope he's forgotten it. But there was a particular uncle who's still very involved in the community. He's much, much older. And he gave me full salams, you know. He just, instead of saying hello, and so I asked him if he spoke English, which is awful, but I didn't know because he, you know, hadn't yet. And so then I told him, like, I want to convert to Islam. And then he understood, you know, but for a brief moment, he looked at me like, really?
Wow. MashaAllah.
And so, yeah, then I decided, you know, to become Muslim, and they called some people to help witness my Shahada, and then I went home.
MashaAllah. So did you find that you had assistance from those Muslims afterwards, or was you still kind of relying on Sheikh Google to learn about the deen?
You know, it was kind of a mixture of both. I would say there wasn't a lot of help in my community. There was one sister in particular who really tried her best, but she was very pregnant, you know, and then she was a new mom, and I think it was a bit hard for her to keep up like long term with me, which is totally fine. But she helped me like with like how to say things in Salah and how to, like, you know, really solidify it. I think I stayed with her for a whole weekend actually, and it really jump started my Islamic journey, you could say.
MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah. So what about getting to wear the hijab? How was that process for you? How did that work?
Well, I had what little I knew about Muslims was that modesty was very important, and before I converted to Islam, I had done some religion hopping, let's say. And so the last thing that I had tried was being very apostolic Pentecostal, which is known for their very modest clothing. So I already had like long skirts, long sleeves, this sort of thing. I just wasn't wearing a headscarf. So it actually provided a rather natural transition into wearing the hijab. And I was still really scared though.
Right.
I think back then I just really feared what people would say. I didn't know any Muslims, and I knew nobody else I knew any Muslims.
Yeah.
You know, so I was aware on some level how this would look to other people, like, oh, she joined this religion where none of us understand it. Does she even understand it? You know? Yeah.
I can definitely relate to that. It's just, and then you put the hijab on, and then, like, in my experience, you know, when I became Muslim and stuff, like, you put the hijab on, and then you're looking different, and then people will, like, randomly just start asking you questions that you don't know the answers to, and then you kind of feel stupid because they expect you to know these answers, but it's just like, well, I understand enough to be a Muslim, but it doesn't mean that I know everything about Islam as well. So yeah, that's quite a difficult transition.
Exactly.
Period. Yeah, especially just being put on the spot. I think even if it was a case where you still know a lot about Islam, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily easy for you to, like, just respond to things when you've been put on the spot, because often people, like, just pull things out of the air and just ask you questions out of the blue, and, you know, you kind of caught off guard. So unless you're practiced with responding to certain things, it can be really, really difficult. So, sister, what about your family then? How did they kind of take you becoming a Muslim, and when you did start to try wearing the hijab, how did that work?
That's a great question. So my parents are actually divorced, and my mom lives out of state, and I grew up with my dad and my grandma. I call her Nana. So when I came home and I was telling my dad and Nana about, you know, I became Muslim, and you know, I came home with this Quran in my hand, and I was kind of interested in it. They were relatively accepting, I would say. At that point, my dad was really struggling with alcoholism, actually, I think. And so I remember him just not really being in the right mindset that day.
Mm.
But he was still fairly supportive. He was like, you know, Tuscany, I don't believe God's real, so it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want, which I guess is like not the end of the world as far as responses go. My mom was a lot more harsh, actually. Oh, and I should add, my nana was she was quiet, but she was receptive.
Mm.
So yeah, it wasn't too bad. It was around that time actually that I moved out of my dad's house and got a place of my own. But my mom really didn't take it well.
Okay, so what about you? What was your transition into the niqab? What made you want to wear the niqab itself?
Yeah, it was about a year into me being Muslim. It was something just that I had seen very, very rarely. You know, I live in an area where the niqab is not normal. It's not commonly worn by the Muslims in the area. One of the sisters that I knew wore it, and I really looked up to her in some level. But then I had also heard, you know, that there were people in Islamic history that had worn it. So, you know, it wasn't just a cultural garment, it was something very real. I think it was something that I kind of just wanted to experiment with, not necessarily in this frivolous, like, oh, you know, I'm going to dress up kind of way. But the way it had been explained to me was that Islam had different levels of hijab,
Mm-hmm.
and that the different levels were for somebody to figure out themselves. So it was more of a curious exploration. And when I started wearing it, I started noticing more peace within myself, more tranquility, more God consciousness, because it's like literally there on your face, right? So,
Yeah,
you know, it really helped my faith in a positive way.
alhamdulillah. So how long have you been wearing it for now, sister?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's been about 7 years.
Okay, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. So would you say that you found it easy to start wearing the niqab? And if so, why or why not?
That's a good question. I would say the niqab was in between. So I had gotten a few different colors from eBay, you know, and of course I just had them sent to my house. And, you know, at this point I was living by myself, so there wasn't as much pullback as maybe some other people might have if they're still living with non-Muslim relatives or anything like that. But I had I think I still struggled a lot.
Okay. In which sense?
I think I struggled with it mentally in a way, you know, because it's not the norm even amongst the Muslim community. You know, I noticed very quickly that there were more Muslims willing to tell me how I should and shouldn't dress rather than like supporting me on my Islamic journey.
Yeah.
You know, no one asked me like, how's your praying going? You know, like how are you really doing? How's your family? People were just like, well, in my country we don't wear it like this, so you shouldn't either.
SubhanAllah.
And you know, it was just kind of difficult. In some capacity, it made me a bit more stubborn, because I just thought like, well, I'm gonna kind of do what I want. And I would say in the early stages, I also had this awareness of how freeing it is to be this person without, not without a body, but like, you know, it's such an image-based society. So it had kind of neutralized a lot of that for me. And it was more like my personality was bigger than anything else. And that was so, so, so freeing.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. So, did you have any obstacles from anybody in your family for wearing it?
You know, honestly, I would say my family, for the most part, once I started wearing the hijab, they were like, well, whatever, she's already being weird. So when when I started wearing the niqab, they were like, well, that's just more of her being kind of weird. Um, I got less pushback for it, I would say, than from the Muslim community. But I also think part of that is just like, I always try to make sure that like my niqabs are like colorful. I like to wear a lot of colors because that's very normal where I live. You know, so for them, they thought, okay, she's wearing things that clearly make her happy. So, yeah, I feel like there was less pushback.
Alhamdulillah. So, what about in the community, the non-Muslim community where you live? Have you faced any kind of abuse or at all for wearing the niqab? And how have people taken you in the community, the change?
Well, I would say it was very difficult. I have a habit of going to the same places now over and over again. You know, like if I go to certain coffee shops or certain parks, and part of that is just to create a familiarity. I have had a fair amount of people really not understand my Islam or my outward appearance as a Muslim. So like even when I was just wearing hijab, I remember it was a very hot July back in like 2012, 2013, something like this. I mentioned to my nana, you know, I was like, I'm hot, and because it was outside, and this woman pulled me aside from my grandmother. We were walking, so my nana actually didn't notice for a bit. And she started yelling at me and telling me to go back home, and that if I was going to live in America, then I needed to, you know, wear things more appropriate for the weather. And I mean, just being really awful. And it really bothered my nana for a long time, I think. Because I think on some level, you fear your children being taken from you when they're little, but you don't expect someone to snatch your grandchild away from you as an adult.
Yeah.
So I think it really worried her and startled her for a while. I've been let go of from jobs for being visibly Muslim many times. It kind of helped launch me into my writing career because I really was looking for jobs where I could kind of make it on my own terms. Like, you know, I wanted to be able to ultimately wear the niqab like full time and not have to worry about people being mean as much.
So, on that note, would you describe the niqab as being a barrier? And if so, which sense?
That is a really good question. I would say it is and it isn't. But it's like it's not really the niqab that's the barrier, right? It's the mindset of the people where they're so bent on making sure that you think that you're oppressed, that they don't realize that they're the ones doing the oppression.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes I just have to tell people, like, literally, it would be fine if you just stopped. You know, like, it doesn't have to be all this. And it's hard for some people to wrap their heads around. You know, and there's such a pressure to be acceptable looking, which is such a farce in the first place.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So when you make a decision that's very purposeful, like, I absolutely do not want to participate in this overly image-based, frankly, anti-woman world, people will take offense to that.
No, definitely. I agree with you, though. I do agree with you, because literally everything is based upon outward appearance, you know, and it's like you're judged on your outward appearance, and then you have to kind of prove that your inward is as good as maybe how your outward perception is. It's like kind of like that.
Absolutely.
So, sister, mashallah, you said that you know, because of jobs that you've been having problems with getting work and things like that, you decided to launch your writing career. So what kind of jobs were you doing previously, and how did you transition from that, and where did you kind of get the idea to go into having a writing career?
Yeah, I've actually done so many like little jobs here and there. I would say, like, I did Uber driving for a while.
Wow.
I worked in telecommunications. I've worked in fast food. I've worked in like a how would I phrase it? I guess like a janitorial setting. For a while, I owned my own cleaning business.
Mashallah.
Yeah, and so part of it was just, I also, like, the cleaning business probably would have been fine, but I also desperately needed to relax more. It's a very very hard job, you know, very hard on the body. You're working with a lot of chemicals all the time, and I was like, you know, what do I really enjoy? And one of my oldest hobbies and enjoyments has been writing, the crafting of words.
Mashallah. So what kind of things do you write about?
I like to write. I like to expand my horizons about the different things that I write. So I feel like typically these days, I'm not creating a whole lot because of COVID. I feel like it's kind of put a wrench in my creativity, but I'm hoping to kind of break through that pretty soon.
Inshallah.
So like my current thing is just like answering questions occasionally for aboutislam.net. And I really enjoy that. I love to answer people's questions about Islam. But yeah, like previously I've written things on like life and love and Islam and in tech and in news, current modern day events, history. Sometimes I like to write poetry. Like I really just kind of go everywhere. I enjoy that.
Alhamdulillah. So do you have like a website or a blog or something like that?
Yes, I do. You can go to tuscanybernier.com and it will have everything in relation to me. There's like my previous articles, there's my blog. I even have like some bad poetry that I've written, bad just because I feel like I'm not a very good poet. But I do enjoy to share my creations with the world, just because I feel like that's the essence of humanity. We all want connection.
MashaAllah. So you've worn the hijab and you've worn the niqab. Do you feel that there's a difference in how you've been treated personally and in your community? Can you see any difference, or do you think there's a difference between the way the sisters who wear the hijab, the scarf, get treated, comparing to the sisters who might be wearing the niqab, for example?
Yes. I would say, so outside the Muslim community, I feel like both are still kind of difficult for people to wear. There's a growing acceptance of hijabis, I think, like in mainstream stuff,
Mm.
just slightly, ever so slightly, to the point where I think people are realizing it's not something foreign. You know, you can, of course, live here and wear hijab. Um, and I'm not seeing quite the same level of acceptance for niqab yet, but that's just because A, there's less of us, and B, I feel like there's less women kind of going out and advocating that it is equally okay.
Yeah.
Um, I think that there's still an issue we have internally and externally from the community where we're like, yeah, you know, accept my version of hijab, but don't accept this other person. That's too far.
Yeah,
That's too
basically.
ridiculous. Yeah. And so sometimes niqabis are still thrown under the bus. um, but I would say internally in the community, I've definitely seen a difference between wearing the hijab and the niqab, and a lot of that comes from people's assumptions. You know, um, there seems to be this idea that niqabis think a lot of themselves, and
Yeah.
really we're just regular people.
Yeah, subhanallah. Like I was talking with a sister before, and we were saying the same thing. And I was saying, I personally don't know where this kind of perception comes from. You know, about niqabis, like that we're really strict, or you know, we don't want to talk to people, and we don't know how to have a laugh and things like that. You know, this kind of idea that exists even in the Muslim community. I mean, I can understand to an extent with maybe non-Muslims because we're covering our faces, so it's hard for them to maybe read, like, you know, have an idea of what we might like. Do you know what I mean? Like they may feel that they can't approach us, for example, and things like that. But in the Muslim community, you know, often Muslims, they, you know, they think this kind of negative way about peep sisters who wear the niqab, and I've experienced this, like even when I wasn't wearing the niqab, like sisters would say things like that, and I was always confused why they would think that, because I personally didn't have that kind of belief. So I don't know where this comes from in the Muslim community. Really, it's quite strange.
Well, I think that there is like a very small minority of niqabi women who um, maybe intend well, but are not very good at like nasiha that really changes the heart, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, maybe they intend to, to just help somebody, right? But maybe their words are harsh or these types of things. Um, and I think it's happened enough where people think it's the norm. But the reality is that it's not. And the thing is, I would say when it comes to the minorities that are bad at Nasiha, really, because like every type of group, every you know, any niche maybe in the Muslim community will have groups of people who really want to try to change their community for the better, but they just don't know how to do it
Yeah,
kindly. Yeah.
basically, yeah, subhanallah. So, have you had any experience traveling while wearing the niqab at all?
Um, just within the United States. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't traveled internationally.
So, what was that like?
Um, I had once traveled from Indiana, where I live, over to LA, and I was actually expecting a lot of hardship at the airport. And then I thought, like, oh, California is going to be super chill.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I actually had no hardship at the airport, which was very weird. I actually went with a hijabi friend, and she got stopped by the airport security, but I didn't.
Okay,
Um,
alhamdulillah.
but yeah, it was just kind of like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And then once I got to California, there's how would I put it? Mm, it's like so few people wear as much clothes. um, so people really thought it was very bizarre. When I visited LA, most of the women I was in contact with didn't wear hijab at all.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they still dressed fairly modestly. And then I went out on the street and I realized like people literally wear like a crop top and like very, very short shorts, you know, etc. And so these sisters who weren't wearing the headscarf still looked very modest according to like California culture. So I looked like really bizarre, but
Yeah.
it was interesting, you know, the sisters there seemed very receptive because they were like, well, we just hadn't had the opportunity to meet very many Niqabis either. And I think I just wasn't expecting it to turn out like that.
Mm. SubhanAllah. So would you think that was kind of like a negative experience or almost, or positive? Like how would you kind of gauge that experience?
Oh, I mean, I would say overall it was a positive experience. I really enjoyed going. It just was not what I was expecting, and I don't think I would change anything when I would go, you know, because I'm still gonna dress the way I do, but now I have an awareness. I would say that I think I was naive. I thought like, oh, this is supposed to be a very liberal place. They're going to be very understanding. But the reality is that some some types of liberal people are only interested in people looking a certain way still.
Yeah. And
So
that's I've always found that quite strange as well, because I mean people consider themselves to be like open-minded, but they're actually not that open-minded.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, subhanallah. So have you met any sisters in your community or otherwise, even online, who you know, maybe they've reached out to you and said that, well, they'd like to wear the niqab, for example, but they're not allowed to wear it? Or have you met any sisters who have been forced into wearing it?
I have. I've met both. You know, um I have traveled a fair amount around the US, and so I've met with many women across many communities from all walks of life. And, you know, I think I was really startled the first time I realized there's actually a woman in my current community. She no longer lives here, but she admitted, she was like, yeah, I'm being forced to wear it. And I was so startled, yeah, because
Yeah.
I thought she was very happy, and that her marriage was happy, and that, you know, I think I just had certain ideas of what that would look like, and she just was like, well, you know, we're just working through it. And um, over time she was able to kind of talk to her husband about the importance of making sure that she's, of course, still modest, but still choosing what she's wearing, you know, not forcing her into it. And yeah, I guess just that whole experience went so much more differently than I had expected. I think because she was so close to my life, it wasn't like a faraway story. I actually really look up to her for her perseverance during that time, and even up till now, I just think she's a lovely human being. But I've met a huge amount of sisters that have told me, I wish I could wear it, but I can't.
Mm. And what are their reasons?
You know, it really depended on the individual person. You know, some women were like, I really want to wear the niqab, but my husband is forcing me to not wear it. Or I feel like I would not be welcome at my job, and we need the job to make sure we can stay here, you know, so then they wouldn't wear it. Or, you know, sometimes people did associate it with like a cultural thing. So like I met some sisters who said like, yeah, whenever I go visit like to Egypt or Jordan, I always wear the niqab, but when I come back here to Tennessee, then I don't wear it. Things like that. So
so do you think it's more like they feel that they can't wear it because they're in the US and it's not something that is accepted, but when they go back home they feel more relaxed, so they think that, yeah, like I can wear it?
110%. That's exactly it.
Alhamdulillah. So what do you advise sisters who are in like these kind of situations, like sisters, for example, who they really would like to wear the niqab, but they feel like not confident to wear it and things like that? What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, I typically advise for any person who is seeking a good relationship with their creator, which hopefully, inshallah, is all of us, to really do some introspection about their why, like why be modest, why pray, why, and as you start exploring your why and internalizing how important it is to foster this good relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it starts to come more naturally. Like even when people are being rude, even when people are discouraging you, when you think about the most important relationship in your life, which should be Allah, then it becomes much easier because you do it out of love.
Of course, yeah. SubhanAllah. Oh, mashallah, that's so true. I think this is something that I try to encourage sisters the same way, because the reality is when we look at the Sahaba and how they used to live, whenever the commands from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came down in the Quran, they was ready to accept them because they had spent such a long time nurturing that kind of love for Allah, and they had this hope for Jannah and fear of the hellfire. So they had this knowledge with them that made the command so easy to follow afterwards. It was, and obviously they lived in a different time from us anyways. The Quran was being revealed like, through their different situations, but we have the Quran now, so anytime like we're going through anything in life, whatever situation we're in, we can take time to look at the Quran, to read it, and to try to apply it into our lives. That's what it's like, it's the book till the end of time. So it's important that we nurture that relationship with the Quran, learn about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, learn about his beautiful names and attributes as well, so that we can really get to know Allah, who he is, and really learn to love him, inshallah. So, and that makes everything easier, when you can do things with more sincerity as well, inshallah.
It's life-changing. I think when you get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is absolutely life-changing.
Yeah, subhanallah. So sister, and just to end the interview now, I'll ask you the final question, which is, what does the niqab mean to you?
Ooh, I like this question. What does the niqab mean to me? For me, it's been my personal choice to consistently put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over the dunya. Because I think I'm the kind of person who, I mean, most women are this way. We enjoy looking pretty, we enjoy, on some level, we do enjoy having a good image. And the niqab is like this very purposeful, like, wait, no, I'm going to put up a wall. I'm going to make sure that I am reassessing, like, am I doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Like, and it's like this regular thing that kind of forces me to stop and think about this whenever I do anything outside the house. And I'm infinitely grateful for that. I think it doesn't necessarily have to be the niqab. Somebody else might have like a certain prayer rug that they carry with them that gives them like this similar feeling of stopping and questioning. But for me, the niqab has done that. And and it's been very freeing. I enjoy it a lot.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair, sister, for giving us your time. And I'm sure the listeners will really enjoy and benefit, from what you've said. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you for having me. You've been really kind, and I've really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair, sister. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.